that the invasion would proceed under certain circumstances. And when that vow was broken, I only interpreted it on the part of Mr. Kennedy as a failure of nerve.
He was scared because Khrushchev says, don't do this or we're going to do that. You know, so he didn't do it, and he deserted the Bay of Pigs. I was involved in the Bay of Pigs. Got a lot of people, friends of mine, that were killed in the Bay of Pigs. And I resent that. Don't play political games with me. I'm a military man. I'm a soldier. I go fight. But damn it, if I risk my ass out there and I'm getting shot at, I don't want some stupid-ass politician to go ahead and make deals behind my back where my people, or maybe myself, are going to get killed. I don't like that.
After the Bay of Pigs, John F. Kennedy angrily said that he was going to break the CIA into 1,000 pieces. I'd like you to respond to that.
I think that for him to have said that was probably a way of disguising from himself the fact that he himself was responsible for the fiasco at the Bay of Pigs. And I'm sure that that's something that haunted him for the rest of his days.
Meanwhile, Fidel's gamble had paid off. The rebel leader quickly purged a corrupt Cuba.
The Mafia made a deal with Batista to allow a vast assemblage of gambling casinos, narcotics operations, vice operations to be developed in Cuba. And just shortly before Castro took over, the mob's base in Cuba was perhaps the equivalent of Las Vegas and Atlantic City today.
When Castro took control of Cuba, he seized all the American casinos and all their assets.
Once he closed the casinos, he closed up really the main source of funding for Cuba.
The bright lights of Havana's casinos dimmed for good, and the mob fled to safer shores, like the Gold Coast of Florida and the neon strips of Las Vegas.
Brothers' unprecedented attack on the mob made headlines.
Bobby Kennedy, during this period of time, was eating mobsters for breakfast.
But did their vendetta backfire? You'll find out when we return to Who Murdered JFK.
As we have seen tonight, President Kennedy, with help from the Central Intelligence Agency, had made a mortal enemy just a few miles offshore. But foreign enemies have never attempted the assassination of an American president. The conspiracy to kill Kennedy found a powerful ally, and it was not foreign, but internal. This internal menace was merciless. It had a reputation for cutting down anyone who got in its way. But never before had it contemplated a hit on a president. But then, no other president had personally gone after it the way Kennedy had. Enter the mob.
For this bill is not a strike-breaking, union-busting bill. You're the best argument I know for it. Your testimony here this afternoon, your complete indifference to the fact that numerous people who hold responsible positions in your union come before this committee and take the Fifth Amendment because an honest answer might tend to incriminate them.
In the late 50s, John and Robert Kennedy built their reputation serving on the McClellan Committee, where they investigated the pervasive influence of organized crime in American life.
Mr. Heitler was burned to death, was he?
I decline to answer.
Can you, what ground?
On the grounds that it may tend to incriminate or lead me into something.
Bobby Kennedy, during this period of time, was eating mobsters for breakfast. He was going after mob figures with all abandon. The investigation lasted from 1957 to about 1960, 1961.
1960, the year Senator John Kennedy was elected president with some unsolicited help from the mob. As former FBI agent Bill Romer explained.
The Chicago mob, particularly under the auspices of Sam Giancana, worked very, very hard for the election of John Kennedy in 1960.
In the opinion of Bill Romer, based on his interpretation of government wiretaps, Frank Sinatra may have played a role.
The reason that the Chicago mob worked so hard for the election of John Kennedy was, as we learned over a microphone, Frank Sinatra very strongly recommended to Sam Giancana that if the Chicago mob would work for Kennedy, that he, particularly through his good graces with Joseph Kennedy, the father of John and Robert, that he could influence them and swing them around so that they would not work as hard on Sam Giancana in particularly and the mob in general.
Instead of showing his gratitude to the gangsters who had helped put him in the White House, one of John Kennedy's first acts as president was to name his mafia-hating brother as Attorney General.
I am pleased to accept the position of the Attorney Generalship of the United States.
Bobby used all the weapons at his disposal, including the FBI and the Justice Department, as he launched an unprecedented attack on organized crime.
In the field of organized crime, I think it's a very serious situation that's facing the country at the present time. I think a lot of steps can be taken in order to deal with the problem.
The Kennedys compiled a 10 most wanted list of the mobsters they were determined to bring to justice. At the top of the list were Sam Giancana, Santos Traficante, Carlos Marcello, and Teamsters President Jimmy Hoffa.
Did you say that SOB, I'll break his back? Who? You. Say to who? To anyone. Did you make that statement after these people testified before the committee?
I never talked to either one of them after testifying.
No, I'm not talking about to them. Did you make that statement here in the hearing room after the testimony was finished?
Not concerning them, far as I know of.
Well, who did you make it about?
I don't know. I may have been discussing somebody in a figure of speech.
Well, who did you make the statement? Whose back were you going to break?
I don't even remember it.
Well, whose back were you going to break, Mr. Hoffa?
Figure of speech, I don't even know who I was talking about, and I don't know what you're talking about.
Away from the courthouse, Hoffa confided to an informant his intense and violent hatred for the Kennedys.
And during this conversation, Hoffa became very upset at Bob Kennedy, and he said, he announced that Bob Kennedy was going to be killed. He was going to kill his entire family. He pointed to a .270 rifle leaning in the corner of the room. He said he was either going to shoot him while he was driving in an open convertible with his dogs, or that he was going to blow up his home at Hickory Hill, Virginia, with plastic explosives. He wanted to incinerate Kennedy and his entire family.
The Kennedy crusade was unprecedented, but by 1963, thousands of mafia figures were either behind bars, under surveillance, or under indictment, but they were under such tight pressure they could barely operate, and they realized that this was the beginning of the end for them unless they did something desperate.
I remember Giancana on one of our microphones saying, this is like Nazi Germany, and I'm the biggest Jew in the country.
Another mobster feeling the heat of Bobby's anti-crime crusade was Carlos Marcello, mafia killer and undisputed lord of the underworld in Dallas and New Orleans.
Being stupid as I am sometimes, I started needling about the Kennedys. Gee, wasn't it too bad that Bobby Kennedy had you picked up and deported to Guatemala? Just to see what he'd say, you know. And then he said, hey, don't worry, we're taking care of that. And I said, what do you mean take care of it? He says, you know, you kill the head, the tail drops off. You're going to kill Bobby Kennedy for it? He said, no, you kill the president, Bobby gets taken care of.
In 1979, during a televised session before the House Select Committee on Assassinations, the most direct mafia threat against the president was exposed by eyewitness Jose Aleman.
Mr. Aleman and Mr. Traficante met at least once, perhaps on several occasions, prior to November 1963.
Did you ultimately go to one or more meetings with Traficante?
Yes, I did. Had various meetings with Santos Traficante.
I'm sorry, Jose. Hoffa can't get you the loan. He's having problems with the Kennedy brothers again.
So he suggested he could help you by securing a Teamsters loan for a condominium project you were interested in.
Correct. Hoffa could not secure the loan so far because he had a lot of troubles with the brothers Kennedy. He was very much upset
very much upset about what Kennedy had been doing to Hoffa, and he felt sympathetic towards Hoffa, described him as a man of,
very much
of the workers. And
very much.
What did the conversation lead to next?
Well, at one point he said, you see, this man, he's not going to be reelected. He's been a man that has been giving everybody a lot of troubles, and he's not going to be reelected.
You're crazy. He's got all the Democrats behind him. He's a sure thing.
No, Jose. He's gonna be hit.
Well, he said, Jose, he's not going to be reelected. You don't understand me. He's going to be hit.
Santos Trapacante, Jimmy Hoffa, Carlos Marcello. 3 men with both the motive and the means to kill the president. When we come back, we'll look at a conspiracy between 2 men in Dallas. 2 men officials say never even met. But first, we'd like to remind you that our 900 numbers are open for your vote.
Dial 1-900-220-2300 to officially reopen the investigation. Dial 1-900-220-2311 to let the Warren Commission findings stand. In a moment, we'll return to Who Murdered JFK?
Adversaries were beginning to gang up on President John F. Kennedy. The Mafia wanted him out of the way. Cuba was in a vengeful mood for all the CIA plots against Castro, and these 2 powerful forces were coming together. The finishing touches were put together where the assassination would take place, in Dallas. We know of at least 2 players in Dallas, Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby. For the last 25 years, we've been told that Oswald and Ruby had never met before the assassination. But you're about to see reenactments of eyewitness accounts indicating that not only had Ruby and Oswald met, they knew each other and could have been co-conspirators. And you will hear other eyewitnesses who corroborate those claims. One of the most disturbing aftermaths of the Kennedy assassination was the murder of accused gunman Lee Harvey Oswald in the basement of the Dallas Police Department. He was shot point blank in the stomach by mob associate and nightclub owner Jack Ruby.
Who's this Jack Ruby guy? Jack Ruby had numerous connections to organized crime.
He grew up in Chicago, where he was, among other things, a runner for Al Capone.
He was brought in for questioning as a suspect in the murder of Leon Cook, who was the head of the Chicago Waste Handlers Union. There was not enough evidence to hold him in custody, and so he was released, and he immediately went to the Chicago Waste Handlers Union. He got a job as an organizer with Paul Dorfman, who was the man who was responsible for introducing Jimmy Hoffa to the Mafia in the Midwest back during the early 1940s.
During the late 40s, the Mafia decided to take over the rackets of the Southwest, and Ruby was one of a group of about a dozen Chicago hoodlums who came down to Dallas with the mob.
Jack Ruby, organized crime figure. But there are others who paint a different picture of Ruby.
I think the best description would be he was a gopher. The fellow would go for sandwiches in the police station.
He was an oddball, a screwball.
He was a well-meaning fellow.
I think he was mentally ill.
Jack Ruby was a hanger-on in the Chicago mob, but he loved the ambiance. He loved the glamour of the mobster.
Several witnesses told the FBI that when you set up illegal gambling in Dallas, you had to clear it with Jack Ruby. He was pretty much controlled the fix of gambling between the police and the mob in the city.
He was a person that tried to get on the good side of any police officer that he met.
The police allowed Jack no favors, anything like that at all, and he never paid them off. He might give them a cup of coffee or something, but Jack liked to think he was in with the police. It gave him a feeling of importance, of being special. He had a in.
Jack Ruby's victim, Lee Harvey Oswald, had an equally bizarre past, with shadowy connections to espionage and organized crime. He was a man whose short life was marked by contradictions. At the age of 17, he joined the United States Marine Corps. When he was 18, he was sent to the top-secret airbase at Asugi, Japan. Some say he was working for military intelligence.
The first time I met Oswald, I felt he was working for somebody. And I felt at that time it was naval intelligence. By his obvious knowledge of my background.
After receiving an early discharge from the Marines, Oswald traveled...
That the invasion would proceed under certain circumstances. And when that vow was broken, I only interpreted it on the part of Mr. Kennedy as a failure of nerve.
He was scared because Khrushchev says, don't do this or we're going to do that. You know, so he didn't do it, and he deserted.
Disguising from himself the fact that he himself was responsible for the fiasco at the Bay of Pigs. And I'm sure that that's something that haunted him for the rest of his days.
Meanwhile, Fidel's gamble had paid off. The rebel leader quickly purged a corrupt Cuba.
The Mafia made a deal with Batista to allow a vast assemblage of gambling casinos.
My people, or maybe myself, are going to get killed. I don't like that.
After the Bay of Pigs, John F. Kennedy angrily said that he was going to break the CIA into 1,000 pieces. I'd like you to respond to that.
I think that for him to have said that was probably a way of...
The Bay of Pigs, I was involved in the Bay of Pigs. Got a lot of people, friends of mine, that were killed in the Bay of Pigs. And I resent that. Don't play political games with me. I'm a military man. I'm a soldier. I go fight. But damn it, if I risk my ass out there and I'm getting shot at, I don't want some stupid-ass politician to go ahead and make deals behind my back
where narcotics operations, vice operations, to be developed in Cuba. And just shortly before Castro took over, the mob's base in Cuba was perhaps the equivalent of Las Vegas and Atlantic City today.
When Castro took control of Cuba, he seized all the American